Is it possible that, in a remote era, there existed a mysterious race of humanoids characterized by a skull that was more elongated than that of humans? In ancient texts, there is often mention of peoples with great abilities and an unusual physical appearance, peoples who passed on knowledge and wisdom to humans. There is specific evidence and discoveries that confirm the truth of these ancient stories. What would happen if evidence of the existence of this ancient people were found? If these traces really existed, shouldn't we be able to find them? In reality, there is a lot of documentation of discoveries that, due to their specific characteristics, should at least raise doubts that there might have existed an ancient people whose traces have been lost. But since this doesn't happen, we should ask why it's being kept quiet. Many of you are probably skeptical about the actual truth of these discoveries, but after watching this video, we're sure you'll have several doubts as well. Today we will explore incredible discoveries, and we will analyze all the evidence that could forever change our understanding of the history of our planet. But before we set off on this fascinating journey, as we always do, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to not miss our new videos. Our story begins with Julio Tello, a Peruvian archaeologist born in 1880, often considered the father of Peruvian archaeology. Tello dedicated his life to discovering the ancient civilizations of Peru, and his contribution to our understanding of these cultures is invaluable. However, one of his most incredible and mysterious discoveries took place in 1928 in Paracas, a coastal region of Peru. During an excavation in a very ancient cemetery, Tello, together with his research group, unearthed a large quantity of human bones, including many skulls. What stood out the most were some of these skulls. About 300 of them had very unusual features for what are considered normal human skulls. These skulls had an abnormal, elongated shape, but not only that, they also showed features incompatible with normal human bones. Before we go any further, let's clear up a misunderstanding. We talked about it in a previous video, but it's important to repeat it because it still causes confusion today. Mainstream science does not deny the existence of these skulls, but it believes that they are the result of particular religious and beauty rituals. Later, we will see that this explanation is not only insufficient to explain this phenomenon, but it's not even technically possible. But for the sake of completeness, let's say that indeed many peoples have a tradition of skull elongation. This practice consisted of binding the soft skulls of children with bands or boards to modify their shape. This process started right after birth and continued until the skull bones hardened, giving the head an elongated shape. Although it was very painful and risky, because it endangered the health of those who underwent it, this practice was actually carried out over the years for ritualistic beauty purposes by peoples in various places around the world. But as we said, believing that all this is enough to explain these unusual findings is a gross mistake, and now we'll try to show you why. Herodotus, the great Greek historian from the 5th century BC, for example, describes the skulls of the Syrian people as longer and stronger compared to those of other peoples. This observation, made thousands of years ago, suggests that the practice of cranial deformation, even in ancient times, was not limited to Peru alone.
I have observed that the skulls of the Syrian people are by far stronger than those of the Egyptians. I believe the reason for this is that the Egyptians from childhood cover their heads with cloths, while the Syrians leave them uncovered. That is why the skulls of the Egyptians are so soft that they can be crushed with a stone, while those of the Syrian people are so hard that they do not break even if struck with a rock.
Thank you for watching. As we mentioned earlier, mainstream science claims that the unusual shape of these skulls comes from an artificial process. Now let's look at these two skulls. On the left, we have a human skull with the classic shape, and on the right, a skull with an unusual shape. What's strange about it? As we can easily notice just by looking at the elongated skull, not only does it have an unusual shape compared to the norm, but it also appears larger. Now, if the elongated shape were due to some kind of compression, it would indeed have a more oblong shape, but it could never have gained more mass. To understand this concept, let's imagine squeezing a balloon. We can change its shape, but the air inside will always be the same. However, this is not the case with elongated skulls. In fact, these show a cranial capacity that's 25% greater. So how is it possible that they have a larger cranial capacity? All of this certainly can't happen with a simple mechanical flattening operation. Some scientists have hypothesized that these skulls were affected by particular pathologies, such as hydrocephalus, but even this hypothesis doesn't hold up for several reasons. The first is certainly that the shape of a hydrocephalic skull is different from that of skulls found around the world. The second piece of evidence is that it is very unlikely that such a pathology would affect such a large number of individuals. Discovery by Tello of 300 skulls with an unusual shape. But if the individuals with deformed skulls had been affected by particular pathologies, which often, as a consequence, cause an alteration of cognitive and motor functions, why would so many peoples of the earth have wanted to imitate that shape and make it a model of beauty? Or as we have deduced from the objects found in the tombs of these individuals, why was this imitation practiced by the higher social classes? As we mentioned earlier, another interesting detail is that the bones that make up these unusually shaped skulls appear to be thicker and stronger. As we have seen, Herodotus spoke about this peculiarity when he described the Syrian skulls.
In Persia, Egypt, and Syria, it is possible to observe a significant difference in the hardness of people's skulls. The Persians wear head coverings, and so do the Egyptians. That's why the skulls of those I mentioned are much softer than those of the Persians. The opposite happens for those who live in Syria, who cover their heads with felt, and for this reason their skulls are much harder.
Clearly, it has nothing to do with whether or not head coverings were used during the development and growth of an individual. But Herodotus couldn't have known that, and he simply made a hypothesis based on the scientific knowledge available to him. But his testimony is still extremely important, because it highlights this anomaly even in ancient times. In fact, consider that the difference between a normal skull and an elongated one is so significant that, when weighed, the anomalously shaped skulls are 60% heavier than a normal skull. But these skulls also have another peculiarity. They lack the sagittal suture. The cranial sutures are fibrous joints that connect the bones of the skull. They are made of dense connective tissue and allow for growth and slight deformation, which are necessary for the development and protection of the brain. The main cranial sutures are the coronal suture, which joins the frontal bone with the two parietal bones, the sagittal suture, which joins the two parietal bones along the midline of the skull, the lambdoid suture, which joins the parietal bones with the occipital bone at the back of the skull, and finally the squamous suture, which joins the parietal bones with the temporal bones on both sides of the skull. As we were saying, these are important because during an individual's growth, they allow the skull to expand. There are various pathologies that involve alterations of the normal functions of the sutures. For example, it can happen that these fuse prematurely and as a consequence lead to compression of the brain during the normal stages of growth, which, if not treated surgically, result in various pathologies, some of which are fatal. To explain the absence of the sagittal suture in the anomalous skulls found in various parts of the world, some scientists have hypothesized that these individuals were affected by some kind of pathology. But precise analyses have disproved this hypothesis and have confirmed that the sagittal suture in these skulls was never present at any stage of development. Another anomaly that we certainly cannot explain with cranial binding concerns the size of the eye sockets, which, as we can see from this photograph, appear significantly larger compared to normal eye orbits. To all this, another very peculiar aspect is added. The point where the spine connects to a normal skull is very different from where it connects to a skull with an abnormal shape. and it is clear that all these anomalies we have talked about cannot have been caused by simple cranial binding or compression, but they all seem to be clues to the existence of a race of humanoids different from ours. Moreover, it has been known since ancient times that these skulls had atypical characteristics, and even researchers in the past understood that these were very different from those produced by artificial cranial compression, and this certainty also came from extraordinary discoveries. Two researchers from the past, Rivero and Sciudi, in 1851 in the book Peruvian Antiquities, described an incredible discovery. Within the book's pages, we find the account of discovering an ancient female mummy. This one, in addition to having the typical elongated head, had an extraordinary feature. She was pregnant. In the woman's womb, there was in fact a fetus, which was estimated to be about 7 months old. So, close to birth and fully formed, at least as far as the skeleton and bones were concerned. At the time, of course, cameras did not yet exist, but as we can see, along with the written description, we have a detailed drawing that depicts the discovery of the fetus.
The same shape of the head is found in unborn children, and we had convincing proof of this in a fetus inside the womb of a mummified pregnant woman, which we found in a cave in Huishai.
But similar discoveries have also occurred in more recent times. For example, in Peru, the skeleton of a young mother was found, and near her, the remains of her child, who is estimated to be 9 months old. Both bodies show elongated skulls and all the anomalies we have discussed so far. Another very famous discovery is that of another Peruvian child, apparently 10 months old, who became known as Detmon Child and is currently in Germany at the Leipzig Museum. In this case, we can see how the little mummy has a skull of unusual shape. But now let's go back for a moment and look again at the drawing depicting the fetus found in 1851 by Rivero and Sciudi. If we look closely at the image, one detail immediately stands out. The fetus is depicted with already developed teeth, which seems odd, since teeth do not emerge until 8 to 10 months after birth. At this point, it's inevitable to wonder why it was depicted this way and whether it's just an artistic license or if there's something more to it. It's hard to call it artistic license in a drawing that aims to represent a discovery as faithfully as possible. So, should we think that the fetus already had a developed set of teeth? It seems impossible, but it would appear so, and this is confirmed by some recent findings. A significant example is the discovery of the skull of a child found near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, who is estimated to have been less than 2 years old. The skull shows the usual anomalies and the absence of the sagittal suture, but it has something more. There are 24 well-formed teeth. In normal development, it is very unusual for a child to already have 24 teeth at just under 2 years old. And this is another extraordinary element that, together with other findings, seems to confirm that these individuals went through developmental stages faster than an ordinary human. One last unusual aspect found in the analysis of these elongated skulls is the presence of 2 holes in the upper part of the skull. These 2 holes must have had some function, which is currently unknown. At this point, however, we need to make another important clarification. The skulls found can't be from people who lived millions of years ago. In fact, in this case, time would have dissolved them, and at best, we would have found fossils. But that's not the case. The condition of these skulls is excellent. Some of them still have tissue attached to the surface of the bones, which suggests that they could be at most a few thousand years old. This aspect is very important because it confirms that these people were present until just a few thousand years ago, if not even more recently. As we mentioned earlier, skulls with similar anomalies have been found in almost every region of the world, and in places that, as far as we know, never had contact with each other in the past. Another curious fact, which is connected to everything we just said about ancient Egypt, was discussed in a previous video, and to avoid repeating ourselves, we'll put the link in the description. But we can't help but say that it's very curious that some ancient depictions in Egypt show that the pharaohs and their children had elongated skulls. At this point, it's inevitable to wonder who these beings with elongated skulls were. Clearly, we don't have a definitive answer, but all the clues seem to suggest that there was a race of humanoid beings similar to humans, but who were not human. This race must have fascinated people all over the world, so much so that they began to imitate them by deforming their skulls in an attempt to look like them. Perhaps they were considered gods or superior beings, and cranial deformation was a way to become closer to them. Historical observations, archaeological findings, and anatomical features clearly indicate that we are talking about a different human race with a distinct genetic structure. The American researcher Brian Forster, in an attempt to solve the mystery of these elongated skulls, started a series of genetic tests on the skulls found in Paracas, and the results were surprising. The DNA of these ancient humans actually tells an unexpected story. Even though Brian Forster took his samples from skulls found in Paracas, and therefore in Peru, these revealed the presence of haplogroups that are associated respectively with Eastern Europe, Mesopotamia, and Syria. But even more surprising was the discovery that some segments of the DNA did not match any known human haplotype, suggesting potentially unique or unknown genetic origins. So according to these genetic tests, these ancient individuals who lived thousands of years ago in South America would actually have a Middle Eastern and European origin, and some traits in their DNA would not match any known traits. The independent nature of these studies, even though they involved qualified scientists, was not met with interest by the official scientific community. Clearly, further investigations will be necessary, but the clues we have analyzed so far and the genetic findings, even though they still require further study, open up new and in some ways revolutionary scenarios. An ancient and mysterious people lived on Earth, and they were able to travel to all corners of the planet. The men they came into contact with were so fascinated by these beings that they tried, through dangerous and complicated practices, to imitate their physical appearance. Who were these ancient people? Are they the divine beings spoken of in traditions all over the world? Have we found evidence of their existence? We will continue to investigate this fascinating mystery. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to not miss our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.